Welcome to another edition of Niners Radio Podcast. I'm Brian Professor B. Davis. This week, my special guest on the Niners Radio Podcast, longtime voice of the Dallas Cowboys. He's been there since the glory days of Tom Landry to the dynasty of the Cowboys in the 90s. The voice of the Cowboys, Mr. Brad Sham, and it starts right now.
I'm Brian Professor B. Davis. We have a special guest on our podcast as your San Francisco 49ers getting ready to take on a rivalry renewed against the Dallas Cowboys this Sunday over at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, Texas. The Niners will be on the southwest of Texas, and the kickoff time will be at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Originally was supposed to be for the NBC Sunday Night Football, but because of the records of the two teams at this time, has been switched to a 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And for any Niner fans who are living in down in the Southwest area, it will be 12 noon Central Time. Game will be on CBS, the exclusive network home of Super Bowl 55. Calling the game, of course, will be Kevin Harlan and Rich Gannon. We have a special guest online previewing this game. He is a longtime voice of the Dallas Cowboys, kind of a Dallas Cowboy lifer, who had been there doing the good and the bad times, and been there, in fact, since 1976. Been there when Roger Staubach and the Doomsday Defense to the Tom Landry era, all the way through the demise of the Cowboys of the late 80s and through the dynasty of the 90s, and to the present. We have the voice of the Dallas Cowboys, Brad Sham, who does the game on ESPN Dallas, KRLD Dallas. And welcome, Brad.
Thanks, Brian. I do just want to correct one thing. It's not ESPN Dallas. It is 105.3 The Fan.
Okay, 105.3 The Fan. My bad.
Yeah, I don't want anybody going to ESPN Dallas and looking for the games, because I don't think ESPN Dallas does any local programming anymore.
Okay. They got to get that update on the internet, though. But okay. So just boy, Brad, it's been a tough season for both teams. The 49ers and Cowboys, a rivalry renewed, a lot of history. But we'll start off with the present. I mean, both teams have been hindered by so many injuries, and it's been a tough sledding. I mean, for Jimmy Garoppolo with the foot injury, not going to play this week, and then Dak Prescott with that horrible, ugly ankle injury against the Giants back in October. I mean, it's still been a lot of problems with the Cowboys with the situation with their defense. What has been going on in Big D? Never ends.
No, it never does. There's one thing about this. Is my 42nd season calling these games, and there's never been a dull one. There have been some bad ones, and this is one of them, but they're never dull. I read the other day that the 49ers lead the league in missed games because of injury.
And COVID-19.
Well, yeah, and COVID-19, but the injury thing was the one I looked at, and I was surprised to. Of course, your old franchises had to move for a while because of COVID-19.
That's correct, Brad. They've ended up moving down to Phoenix, down to Phoenix, or actually down to Glendale, where the Cardinals play at, your old NFC East neighbor, the Cardinals. And there is a lot of Cowboys and 49er fans down there in the desert as well, because the Cowboy fans and 49er fans do travel very well.
No question, and I was surprised to read that the 49ers led the league in games missed to injury, because the Cowboys must, because they signed Gerald McCoy, who they thought was going to be an anchor offensive line, and they lost him for the year on the first day of training camp. And then you mentioned Prescott, and they've lost their tight end and both offensive tackles and their future Hall of Fame guard, Zach Martin. They have not, the 49ers are going through it right now in the middle of the offensive line, and this might be the first time Sunday the Cowboys play the offensive line 3 weeks in a row. They've been decimated by injury in the secondary, and it's just been It's been ridiculous, and to my way of thinking, no excuse, because everybody's got injuries. Some people have it worse, and everybody was playing by the same rules.
Oh yeah, and well, them not having the full OTA off-season programs did not help because, and not to make excuses, Brad, but you have to be well conditioned and have these OTAs to prevent injury. I mean, injuries are going to happen one way or the other, but the lack with the less resources due to the COVID is kind of and when you don't, when you're just very limited during this unfortunate season due to the pandemic.
I think that's been the reason for the big rash of injuries around the league. As you say, injuries always happen, but it's not just the OTAs, because strength and conditioning programs start in April before players are allowed back on the field. And this year they didn't have the strength and conditioning portion of the calendar. They did not have then OTAs and mini camps, and they did not have preseason games. And you'll never convince me that the rash of injuries throughout the league is not at least partially to be pinned on what the pandemic did. And there was nothing to be done about it, because health and safety are first, but I think that's been part of the story.
That's correct. I mean, yeah. But let's just get into the action of this game. You got Andy Dalton, the former Bengal quarterback. The Niners saw him a very few times. Him being the backup, and the Cowboys, got Amari Cooper, and they got some weapons on offense. I mean,
well, they do, and Dalton's a capable quarterback. He had a good run in Cincinnati. He went to some Pro Bowls and had him in the playoffs like several years in a row. So I mean, he is a capable quarterback, and he could be starting for some teams. He has not played great. He's had some games here real good, and he's missed a couple himself, and his offensive line problems have really been a huge part of the whole story of the offense. But you could do a lot worse. He's a capable backup quarterback.
Yeah, and the same thing with the 49ers, because Jimmy, the way it looks right now, if you look at the two records, the Niners are 5-8, the Cowboys are 4-9. The loser of this game is pretty much are mathematically eliminated from the playoff chase in the NFC. The Niners, they would have to win out and get some significant help, but even if they end up tying with the one for the final playoff spot, they literally lose all the tiebreakers. Could have way too many losses in the conference, and that's going to be the deciding fate. But the Cowboys in the NFC East is the most inferior division. I mean, what has happened to the NFC East? Why had not they been the NFC East like have seen in years past, like probably in the 80s and the 90s, or in the early or in the mid 2000s for a bit when the Giants, Redskins, Eagles came back to life for a bit. What has happened with the NFC East? Why it's so inferior in recent years?
Well, I don't know. It hasn't been this bad in recent years. It's clearly the worst division maybe of all time this year. And I think that part of the reason has to do with the things we've already talked about. I think there were 5 new head coaches in the league this year, and 3 of them were in this division. Now, the other 2 have done better than the one here, but they've all struggled. Washington and the Giants have shown signs of turning things around, and both of those teams have better defenses than Dallas. But I think that new coaching staffs putting in new programs were at a bigger disadvantage because of what you didn't have in the spring and the summer. And then you throw in the injury factor, and in fact, all 3 of those teams, Giants, Washington, and Dallas, have had quarterback injuries, and as the 49ers know, that's the worst place to have one. Philadelphia hasn't really had injury problems there, They've had injury problems other places,
Yeah.
but they have had instability at the quarterback position. Now they've made a change. They may be, at least for the moment, better than they've been. And I believe they've got 2 division games to finish off the year. I think they have 3, actually. No, they have 2. They have 2 to finish off the year.
They get 2 guys next
week, and then and then I think they finish off with Washington. And so it happens to be a year when I think the new coaching staffs in 3 of the 4 places was a big factor, and injuries was a factor for a lot of the rest of it. And then some of it's just dumb luck, but there's no doubt it's the worst division that any of us have ever seen.
Yeah, because a lot of people had picked really the Eagles to win that division, but the injuries and the inconsistency of Carson Wentz had been playing so poorly throughout the year. They went with Jalen Hurts, the rookie phenom, and they were able to get a win last Sunday against the Saints with one of the best records in the NFC. And they've had their share of injuries, not just this year, but the last couple of years since finally getting over the hump and winning the franchise's first Super Bowl and their first league title in nearly 6 decades.
Yes, that's correct.
And then so also this we're going to go also back down memory lane. We know about the Niners and Cowboy rivalry. It goes back to the early 70s. It was from like Roger Staubach and Craig Morton to likes like Bob Lilly to Calvin Hill, Walt Garrison to the Doomsday defense of and Too Tall Jones, those guys, Harvey Martin, to Charlie Waters, to and Randy White, consensus All-Pro. I remember growing up watching him in the 80s, Tony Dorsett, and what was that? The rivalry between these two, the Niners and Cowboys. What's some of your favorite memories, Brad? You've seen it on both sides.
Yeah, they have had, as you're indicating, they've had several incarnations. The first one was in the 70s. So they had some great games at Kezar Stadium in San Francisco, and then a little bit later in the 70s when
the Cotton Bowl.
Yeah, and then a little later in the 70s, of course, Joe Montana came in. The catch game was one of the most famous games in NFL history, not just this franchise or the 49ers franchise or the rivalry. That was one of the most well-recognized games in the history of the league.
Wow.
So you had the rivalry was very big throughout the early Montana years and the Staubach to Danny White years, and then in the 90s, obviously, it kicked up again when they traded back and forth and took turns winning the NFC and winning the Super Bowl. And anytime you have teams who have playoff histories like that, then you're going to have a rivalry. Now, this year, neither team is physically up to that because of the injuries.
I know.
But it doesn't take much to get it back. It won't happen in this game, but give it a couple of years of, the 49ers obviously in the Super Bowl last year, and you give them some good health, and if the Cowboys are able to kind of turn their business around next year, then that rivalry will rekindle again without any question.
Well, you look at the schedule. If both teams finish dead last in the division, the way how it goes in the standings,
they'll play each other.
Likely will play Dallas again next year, and I really, hopefully next year or down the road, these games mean something for both teams at the same time. Because Brad, that was in the '80s, Montana and Clark, the catch, and rest his soul, Dwight Clark and some other players on the Dallas Cowboy team of the late 70s and through that 80s period are no longer with us, including the legendary both Tom Landry and Bill Walsh, who are no longer with us. That one play really put the Niners on the map. And you even look at the even in the mid '80s, you had where Tony Dorsett and Herschel Walker coming to the Cowboys. And Herschel came there in '86, where the Cowboys were going through their down cycle, which in '86 people forget. The Cowboys had that stretch for 20 years, from 65 to about 85 or so, where they only missed the playoffs twice, and they had 20 consecutive losing seasons, 18 playoff appearances, and 5 Super Bowl appearances, winning 2 of the 5, winning twice in the 70s. And then you look at back '86, where they had the first of 5 straight losing seasons from '86 to '90, which included it really hit rock bottom in the late '80s, especially in '88, where Tom Landry's final season, they went 3-13. Their only head coach, him and Tex Schramm and Gil Brandt and Clint Murchison, that regime came to an end of '88, and then Jerry Jones by the Cowboys, and he cleaned and brought in Jimmy Johnson. And then while the Niners were on their way to winning their third in their winning back-to-back Super Bowls in '89, we remember Herschel Walker getting dealt to the Vikings, which is probably, they say in Dallas, the greatest highway train robbery, but it was the greatest maybe the greatest in-season blockbuster trade in NFL history, because they were able to get multiple 1s and 2s and 3s, 4, 5s, whatever it was, and Jimmy kept trading up and down, and that's when you bring in the Emmitt Smiths, the Alvin Harpers, the Russell Marylands, the Daryl Moose Johnsons, and making team transactions like before Jay Novacek. And, they kept on just getting these pieces left and right. And then it started to pay off in '91. They made the playoffs. Then '92, we all remember Candlestick Park on that rainy, soggy day at the Stick, when the Niners, the team of the '80s, against the upstarts, the Cowboys, who were the youngest team in football, Ken Norton Jr. and Michael Irvin and a few other veteran players like Jim Jeffcoat and Bill Bates were there with holders of the Landry regime, was there doing some of the bad times in the late '80s, and then you bring in a Tony Casillas, and all came to fruition when they won the first of 3 Super Bowls out of the next 4 years. And then the Niners, of course, after losing twice to Dallas in '92 and '93, they end up reloading that team, adding pieces for, players restructuring their contract to get guys like a Ken Norton Jr. and a Deion Sanders. They were willing to take less money for them to get that 5th Super Bowl, and I enjoyed every minute of that rivalry, because that was the real Super Bowl, Brad. We both know these were the 2 best teams in football.
Well, certainly the games would indicate that. I always hate it when people discredit the Buffalo Bills. They were in 4 straight Super Bowls, and they didn't win any of them, and people seem to think that that's not much of an accomplishment. I always disagree with that, but there's no doubt that there was a stretch there when the 49ers and the Cowboys were the 2 best teams in the league.
I mean, those were just, the hype, even since the start of training camp. And like I said, no disrespect to the Buffalo Bills, and I know you guys, after beating us in '92 and '93, you guys kind of mollywopped them in Super Bowl 27, and then Super Bowl 28. The Bills outplayed the Cowboys the first half of that rematch, and people forget the Bills beat the Cowboys in week number 2 without Emmitt Smith, who was in that holdout in '93, but then end up beating them. The Cowboys you guys beat them again in the Super Bowl, which the Bills outplayed them the first half in that rematch in Atlanta.
They did, and fortunately for Dallas, you still have to play both halves.
And what the key of that second half of that Super Bowl was, the key was giving the ball to Emmitt Smith, and then the turning point of that game, James Washington with the picking up that fumble for a touchdown, simply totally the momentum shifted definitely on the Cowboys side, though.
Yeah, I always thought Washington, with all due respect to Emmett, who clearly put them on their back once they got kind of back in the game, but I always thought that Washington deserved to be the MVP of that game. He had a couple of takeaways, and as you said, he completely changed the momentum of the game.
And then, what was it like with Jimmy Johnson and Jerry Jones? It was a big time soap opera, and like we said, they had their differences. What was it like between with Jimmy and Jerry though?
Well, when Jimmy never had a full-time job in his life more than 5 years, and so knowing that, I mean, it also turned true in Miami when he went to the Dolphins, and it was true in Miami with the University of Miami before he came here. So his clock was ticking. They're both guys with very healthy egos, but it's not like they were fighting every minute. They were college teammates, and the plan that Jerry had was to bring Jimmy with him wherever he got an opportunity to buy a franchise. They did very well together until they didn't, and their egos probably got in the way a little bit, but Jimmy had a foot out the door anyway. He was talking to Jacksonville's people when they were being given a franchise, and that really precipitated the kind of fallout between him and Jerry. But it wasn't like it was a bloodbath all the time. They got along great right up until the end.
And then, of course, Barry Switzer, another, and by the way, by trade, my college team is the university. My favorite college football team is the Miami Hurricanes as well. So, but that's for off the book. But also, you had Barry Switzer, who was a rival the Miami Hurricanes, who took over the Cowboys in 1994 and had took over that team. And the team they took over in '94, and they won that third Super Bowl in 4 years, beating the Steelers. What was it like when Switzer was there? When Barry Switzer was there?
Well, I only was with the team for one of Switzer's years. I left for 3 years to do baseball after the '94 season, but I was still pretty close to a lot of people on the team, and it was tumultuous. He had a much different personality and organizational style.
Right.
He took over Jimmy's team. They had that memorable championship game in San Francisco, which the 49ers won in the '94 season, and then Dallas came back in '95 and won the Super Bowl. But that was already a team that was fraying internally. They weren't getting along, and it really kind of fell apart in '96. And so that was pretty much the end of that.
Right, and then Irving got in trouble, got suspended by the league.
There was a lot of them got in trouble, and
also Eric Williams, Leon Ladd. There was a lot of problems, and then
and then Switzer got fired after the '97 season, and then they've kind of had some moments. They brought Chan Gailey in for 2 years and Dave Campo for 3, and they had some salary cap problems.
Oh yeah, same
at that point, and then they got Bill Parcells in here, kind of turned things around a little bit, and they've been looking for the formula to get back ever since.
Well, you think about this though, I mean, the Cowboys have not been to the NFC Championship game in over a quarter. The last time they were have not gotten to the NFC title game when Bill Clinton was still in office. That's how far the last time the Cowboys had been. Otherwise,
yes, I'm aware of that.
Huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you look at the flip side of the coin. The 49ers have been to the NFC title game since 1997, or since the last time they met up in the championship game. They went about 5 or 6 times, and they hadn't won they lost in both Super Bowls, and they've been close to getting that 6th title. But then they've had their share of sandwiching between that. After Seifert left, Steve Mariucci took over in '97. Then of course they had their share of salary cap problems, injuries to Steve Young, some heavy backloaded dead money contracts, and the Niners, 2003 beyond was the dark years of the 49ers. They, with Mike Nolan, of course, he's the son of the late Dick Nolan, who was on Tom Landry's staff before coming out to San Francisco, and then, Harbaugh came over, and then, they went to 3 straight NFC Championship games, and then things fell apart for him and former Niners general manager Trent Baalke. Jed York, who is the nephew of Eddie DeBartolo, brings in Kyle Shanahan and former All-Pro safety John Lynch. And what are your thoughts about Kyle and John? What are your thoughts with those?
I know John a little bit, and I mean, obviously they've both done a tremendous job. There's no doubt about that. And I think Kyle Shanahan was one of the top offensive minds in the game that led him to getting this opportunity. But I know John Lynch a little bit, and I have always been impressed with John. I think I wish that he would win one of these Hall of Fame votes because I think he deserves to be in. But he's just a high-class person, and other than the fact that the Cowboys are a rival, I'm really happy for his success. He's the kind of guy that you want to build a franchise around.
And I'd definitely like to see, everybody say out here in San Francisco, Roger Craig definitely is a Hall of Famer in my books, and definitely Drew Pearson in my books is definitely a Hall of Famer.
Well, I think Pearson's been overlooked for decades, but the committee has voted him in. Now they've still 80% of the voting members still have to vote at the Super Bowl this year for him and the former Raiders coach. But I think that will happen. Yeah, Tom Flores. I think that'll happen, and I think both of them probably should have been in a long time ago.
I think him and Cliff Branch and then Roger Craig of the 49ers should definitely be in there. You get 1,000 yards both receiving and rushing and NFC Offensive Player of the Year. And then what are your thoughts about Jerry Jones? I've talked to a lot of Niner fans on Facebook, and I always put in a good assessment about Jerry Jones. And I always say it though, and I know, he's the owner, but I believe in that theory that an owner cannot be both. He can't be owner and general manager at the same time, because if you do both, it's not gonna work out. Why has the Cowboys have not had the success like they were 25 years ago? Why they have not been like they had in the 90s?
Well, they've had a variety of problems, and if I knew the exact answer to that, I would probably be on their payroll. But I think that they have had trouble from time to time getting some stability in the head coaching business, and when they have had some stability there, some of the player selections have not worked out. You have to have the right players. You have to have the right mix. And it's a great frustration to them, but it's not like they don't know the football business. I mean, Stephen Jones has been in it for over 30 years with his dad now, and he's one of the most respected football men around the league. I think they went through a period where, in the late 90s especially, where they might not have had the right people in charge of scouting and drafting. And since Will McClay became the head of their scouting department, they have done a lot better at that. They've had some really good drafts. They have not been able to get over the hump, and they're going to have to figure out a way to do it. I think that they'll probably start paying a little more attention to defense, and that may be one of the missing ingredients for them.
And then also, Jerry Jones, he's been in this business now since 1989. That same year, of course, the Niners were going to win back-to-back Super Bowls, were the team of the 80s. I was watching NFL Timeline, and the thing about with Jerry Jones one day hooked up with Eddie DeBartolo. He made a trip out to the Bay Area, and, of course, the Niners at that time were the model franchise, the sustainable franchise, what Jed York and John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan is trying to do, get them back to those days with Bill Walsh and George Seifert and Eddie and that group of doing that time when I was growing up in the 80s and through the 90s.
It's a different league now, Brian. The money rules have changed.
Right.
It's a much different league. The money rules have changed everything.
Oh, yeah.
Jimmy Johnson, for instance, for all his success, did not have a salary cap to deal with when he was in Dallas. Yeah. And he didn't even have free agency to deal with. They had Plan B free agency came in after the 92 season. And now nobody plays with the same team for a career anymore, and you have salary cap issues that you have to deal with all the time. I think it's really a lot harder than it has been in the past to maintain excellence, and I think managing that cap is a big part of the formula.
Hard cap, and remember 20 after it was, I'll say after excuse me, the Niners won that 5th Super Bowl for both teams, because the Niners had to part with Ricky Waters, who signed with Philadelphia, and then you guys had to say goodbye to the other big playmaker, Alvin Harper, and some other key players of the Jimmy Johnson draft that built them that dynasty.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing about that. There's guys, and Harper's a great example of a guy who took advantage of the system. He was going because he was on a high-profile team and he was a good player in his role. Then he got paid as a lead receiver, and I'm not sure he was ever that.
Never came after he left the Cowboys, for sure.
And the money changes people, and so there have been a lot of guys on a lot of teams that have fallen into that category. You have to be really smart with how you portion the money, and sometimes you let a guy go that you don't want to let go, but it doesn't make sense at the position and with the other players you've got on your team, and that's just part of what you have to figure out how to leverage.
Like I said,
Brian, I appreciate being with you. I'm going to have to run.
All right, hey, thank you for being on, Brad, and wish all you guys happy holidays, and hopefully next year when things are better with the COVID, this thing is under control. Hopefully down the road, whatever, take a trip down there to Big D, check out a Niners Cowboy game down there at that new Palace down there in Arlington. Yeah,
that'd be great. I look forward to it. Happy holidays to you.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. That is the voice of the Dallas Cowboys.
I'd like to thank our special guest, Brad Sham, the longtime voice of the Dallas Cowboys, coming on our special guest on our Niners Radio podcast. We hope to hear from him again in the near foreseeable future. The 49ers will be taking on the Dallas Cowboys. It's an early morning kickoff at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and the game will be seen on CBS. That's the early game, 10 a.m. Pacific. Niners Radio presented by Jack in the Box. 2 49er touchdowns means a free jumbo jack, free with a purchase of a large drink the day after the game. Visit your San Francisco Bay Area participating Jack in the Box restaurants the day after the game. Jack in the Box is a proud sponsor for the San Francisco 49ers. And by Pete's Coffee. Hey 49er fans, do you have the Pete's Coffee app? Download Pete's app today and use the code Niners to get $5 off your first app order. Plus, get weekly exclusive Touchdown Tuesday offers for the rest of the season. Pete's Coffee is the proud partner of the San Francisco 49ers. And a reminder coming up, programming note for fans listening to this podcast in the Bay Area, for all the Bay Area residents throughout the Bay Area, watch 49ers Game Plan, exclusive 101 with the voice of your San Francisco 49ers, Greg Papa, along with head coach Kyle Shanahan. This Friday night at 9 p.m. And after that, it will be 49ers in the Huddle. That will be at Friday night at 9:30. That be once again at 9 will be the game plan between the Niners and the Cowboys with Greg Papa and Kyle Shanahan. Then at 9:30, 49ers in the Huddle. That's Friday night at 9:30. You can see both of those programs on NBC Sports Bay Area. And then a reminder coming up, the lineup for Sunday, the Niners will be taking on the Dallas Cowboys at AT&T Stadium. At 9 a.m. will be the NBC Sports 49ers pregame live, along with Laura Brett, Jeff Garcia, the former Pro Bowler, the Hitman Dante Whitner, Ian Williams, and Takeo Spikes. That'll be at 9 a.m. Also along with Niners insiders Matt Mayoko and Jennifer Lee Chan. Then it'll be Niners Radio Live pregame show along with yours truly, Brian Professor B. Davis. That will come on and commence at 9:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And that will be on ASN Bay Area. Niners Radio will be giving you pregame live, part of the ASN Bay Area network. Then at 10 a.m. it's the kickoff of the rivalry renewed. 49ers will be taking on the Dallas Cowboys. That's a 10 a.m. kickoff. The game will be on in the Bay Area on KPIX CBS 5, your exclusive home and station home of Super Bowl 55. The announcers of this game will be Kevin Harlan and Rich Gannon. The game will also be on the 49ers flagship station, KMBR 680 104.5 FM and 107.7 FM The Bone, as Greg Papa and Tim Ryan will give you the play-by-play and descriptions of the game. And for the latest news on 49ers and so much more, go to 49ers.com. I'm Brian Professor B. Davis. Thank you for listening to the 49ers podcast on Niners Radio. Niners Radio is an association with ASN Bay Area.